All right, so you can guess by the thumbnail, but UC PIQ 2 is probably one of the hardest ones to actually tackle. Before I get to this, though, just some important things that I have to talk about, all right? So I'm Bagpipe. I did college consulting for 7 years now, and I help people get into T20 schools like UC Berkeley, U Chicago, Stanford, UPenn, pretty much all that good stuff. My job is to make sure you don't write essays that make you look like a goober. So, yeah, let's just get right into it. So, yeah, lots of stuff to cover. So, I'll try to be as brief and comprehensive as I possibly can about this, okay? I pretty much have the UCPIQ2 pasted here. It's every person has a creative side, and it can be expressed in many ways: problem solving, original and innovative thinking, and artistically, to name a few. Describe how you express your creative side. Okay, so some common pitfalls. Number one, main character syndrome. We kind of covered this before in the previous video, but I can cover it pretty briefly. Long story short, people are told by their tutors and other college consultants to tie their essay back to themselves. This isn't really entirely wrong per se, but it often leads students to making everything, like absolutely everything, about themselves, and it pretty much just devolves into shoving stuff like achievements and victories, obstacles, extracurriculars, all that kind of good stuff, down the admissions officers' throats. It's the point where like the AOs can't really have any space to interpret who you are on your own terms. Yeah, like don't do that. But if you actually want to check out like more information regarding main character syndrome, I actually do highly recommend that. Check out the previous video. You can go and check that out there. So yeah. Okay, so number two, not answering the prompt. Uh, this is actually one that a lot of my AP Lit kids seem to struggle with too. So it could just be some kind of like universal constant that like students can't answer prompts directly, like when they're just like hyper focused. Don't worry though, like this is actually like a common problem like across the board for like everybody. So honestly, like your teachers are practically used to it by now. But like don't worry about it. So yeah, like actually do worry about it, but it's not too bad. Hot tip, by the way, if you are actually struggling with this, you should actually be asking yourself if your answers are relevant to the question. Like, it's gonna sound dumb, but like, like literally every 5 minutes, like you should be like a parrot. Like I know that sounds dumb and it's like obvious advice, right? But like this actually works, right? Like seriously, it's actually because people don't ask themselves whether they're actually answering the prompt or not. It's like a stupid easy habit, but like it actually works, right? As silly as it sounds. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward. Okay, so number three, right? Shiny object syndrome. Okay, so side note. I guess if I had like a gold doubloon for every time I gave advice with the word syndrome in it, I'd have like two doubloons, which isn't a lot, but like, hey, it's kind of weird that happened twice, right? But yeah, anyway, what is shiny object syndrome, right? There's actually a lot of stuff to talk about with this pitfall, so I'll try to cover this like pretty concisely without getting into like all the psychology kind of stuff, right? At least to the best of my ability. So shiny object syndrome is when you're like practically paralyzed because you're not really able to make any progress. It's not actually due to lacking like a good college essay topic or anything. It's actually more like you're just dissatisfied with like any topic, so you just pretty much keep jumping ship. Realistically, it just just coming from a consultant, right? Like, honest to God, right? There's often never anything wrong with the original topic, right? Like, it's just that, like, the mind gets anxious, you know? Oh, by the way, this is going to be important, so like listen up because like this might contradict a lot of the advice you get online. Okay, so it's actually the anxiety of rejection that makes people think their topics are bad, not the actual topic themselves. And they keep like searching for better topics, like some kind of golden object, some savior that would like magically make all their anxieties go away. But like, newsflash, right? No topic is ever going to be perfect enough to be the most creativist of all. It doesn't exist. Like nothing in this universe is ever enough for that, right? Like just seriously, like there isn't. All right, trust me. Okay. Funnily enough, people in the business and entrepreneurship world, like that kind of like sister fields, right? They actually suffer from this a lot outside of the essays, right? Like when they actually like graduate from university. like for example, like when you take a look at the guys who are like creating new ideas and like working on projects like in school accelerators and stuff, right? Like a lot of these business kids, they actually usually end up just like chasing what looks to be making money or seems to be hot at the time, like the big hot trend, rather than the actual like initial plan that they were inspired by, right? So if you're one of those people in the sister fields like investment banking, finance, or like entrepreneurship, vying for schools like Berkeley, you got to watch out for this, man, right? It's like a death trap for a lot of students applying to these sister fields for sure. Especially when you can't stay dedicated to a niche and you just end up jumping to the next big thing, like I don't know, like AI or like stuff like that, right? So yeah, don't do it. All right. Uh, okay, let's talk about the stuff you probably should be doing. So, rule number one of UC PIQ 2, the creative essay. You got to define creativity. All right, so there's a lot of different people applying to UC schools, and some of y'all are doing things like the medical route. Some of you guys are like in the law route, finance, whatever, right? Like in every dimension, there's going to be some variance when it comes to creativity, right? If you take a look at like the chess nerds, right? These guys are probably going to be thinking in like patterns, right? Especially at like the high elo level, they're probably going against the grain from like conventional things. When it comes to conventional openings and stuff, right? Like these are the weirdos starting their moves with the king, right? And then you got like people like the great writers, right? People who are like creative writers will find unconventional ways to make their stories interesting, right? I actually had a few clients of mine write about the romance stories they crafted on. It was like on Wattpad, right? It was, it was actually mostly stuff from like, people like reincarnating into like fantasy worlds with like magic and like super like pretty boys like fawning over them, like. It's like a lot of this like typical self-insert kind of stuff, right? It's not like anything like super deep or anything, right? And by the way, like side note, like a lot of these people are afraid of sharing their creative interests because they think it's like cringy, right? But I mean, like realistically, like not even, dude, right? Admissions officers actually like some of these unconventional and interesting topics. Like that way, they know that you're actually human and you have interests, right? They're not going to be bored to death, right? Besides, like a lot of my clients who wrote about this stuff, like they were accepted anyway, right? So chances are, like whatever it is that you're writing about, you're probably in the clear, right? Just don't write about like drugs or something, right? Okay. So that actually brings me to my second point, right? Don't be afraid of being unconventional despite what you've heard online. Okay, holy crap, this is going to be a difficult one, but just here's the gist of it, all right? So, long story short, there's this premise online that UC admissions officers are like in a rush and really they need to go like through your essay super fast, right? And again, right, like second time, like this is like pretty much kind of true, right? The problem is that the prescription for this is that you ought to avoid any unconventional writing at all. Like avoid it like the plague, right? Like and that kind of makes sense though. There's just like one issue, right? So like you're writing a personal insight question, or you're answering a personal insight question, right? Like dude, the instructions on the website allow you to have a little bit more intellectual and creative freedom, right? Like it's called personal for a reason, right? Like like I get where they're coming from, right? But like how the hell are you supposed to how the hell are you even supposed to stand out without being creative and unconventional in essays, right? That's literally the point of the essay. That's what it means to be like holistic, right? That's why they gave you the essay, for Christ's sake, right? Like being unassuming in a sea of competitive applicants, all vying for a spot just because you're afraid the AOs want you to be fast. It's like shooting yourself in the foot, right? Like, dude. In fact, like, okay, so as a general rule, you should probably consider this, right? Most undergrad essays, say for like, like the YS ones or like the major related ones, they're not they're usually going to be allowing you some kind of like creativity or like some kind of like, narrative like liberty, right? Typically the narrative format is going to be best. It's often only in like the master's and PhD programs where you're writing like statements of purposes and stuff, or if like you're defending anything that you guys have to be like super professional or super formal, right? So just make sure you don't suck out all the creativity out of your writing style and like bore them to death, right? That's like goober mentality, okay? So yeah, this is gonna be the last one, all right? This is actually a really weird one, but bear with me. Number 3, all right? It's show don't tell. It's not show don't tell, all right, but it's rather show and tell. Okay, so this is gonna be a little bit difficult. Okay, so hold on for a sec, because I'm gonna have to like explain through all this. I feel like that's been the case for like all these essay, you know, pieces of advice, but let me explain this. All right, so it's one of those situations with like a million different alternatives to the rules. Like it's got like a gajillion exceptions, right? There's no like solid right or wrong answer. Uh, it's like how in grammar, that like the exceptions with like I before E, right? Is the same thing, right? In the case of creative writing, sometimes floweriness is okay, and sometimes you have to double down, but sometimes it's really just too much, and you can never really know when it's too much, right? You have to let your writing, like, pretty much breathe at some point, right? Like, no one's gonna know what the hell you're saying if all of it is imagery and metaphor, right? Like, at least use some telling to ground it in the reality, right? Like that way your AOs have a reference point, uh, so they know, right? Like there's no solid right or wrong answer, right? Like as I said before, right? But you got to kind of figure out like what enough is enough, right? Um, yeah, I know. Like you just have to know, right? Like that's kind of what makes this rule so tricky, right? It's pretty much like just like having narrative sense, like having a sense for what feels right. Because yes, there's like a fine line between like too much imagery and just right? So yeah, I'm gonna give you an example of a UC PIQ2 format. So at least like you're kind of not left like too empty-handed or anything, or like you at least have some actionable results. So yeah, let's just say you're like a business student, right? And you're shooting for like Cal, because like that's like the most common premise that like I get. You want that sweet like Haas profile for that like business major nectar, like yeah, right. Like, let's just say you got like through connections, right? You managed to land an internship. Okay. Uh, look, I know Goldman Sachs would like never happen for like anyone, but it's just an example, right? So just kind of work with it. So you're working an internship at Goldman Sachs, right? And you're pretty much like desperate to prove yourself, right? Like you're enamored with the idea of making it big in this opportunity. So like you do everything you can to like impress people, right? Like, but it might sound businessy, right? Sure, it's got like the big title and all that, but you actually start to realize in the middle of this internship, like it happens with like all internships, that you just don't know anything, right? You're practically just a goober, right? Like it's kind of like all across the board, like all internships are like that, right? Turns out you actually don't know anything. But it's actually in this position of like not being in control, of like not knowing anything, of not being like the smartest person in the room, where you have to like pivot, right? Okay, so this is the instance of like having to change, of like having to adapt, right? Like you started off smart and you got this internship, and then suddenly you have to adapt, right? This is like the climax of your essay, right? This is where like all the action, all of like the crux of all the cool stuff is like actually taking place, right? So that kind of begs the question, right? Where would I put all the imagery in? Do I like put it in the beginning, where I like talk about entering the building and like smelling the aroma of capitalism as it like invades my nostrils? Like probably not, right? Like it's probably going to go into stuff like the climax, right? That's how you roughly balance out the imagery of your creative essay. You just put it in the stuff that actually matters, and you try to remove it in the things where you actually need to tell, right? It'll work, right? Trust it. You don't have to make everything show don't tell. You just got to have a balance, all right? Okay, so that's pretty much it for this video. UCPIQ2 is definitely still a hard one, and for sure, it actually takes a lot of experimentation to get it right? Chances are you're probably going to be doing like a couple of drafts of this before you really get it solid, but it's actually a really solid prompt. Like, if you can get it right, it actually really stands out, okay? Like, seriously, I think some of the best ones actually turned out to be UCPIQ2s, but it's just like, kind of like a double-edged sword, right? You gotta win some, lose some, so... And honestly, like, if you're hardworking, you're creative, you don't even really need to like shell out a gajillion dollars to like some consulting firm, to help you with this stuff, right? Okay, so got it? Cool. Yeah, that's about it. All right, see ya.